This episode of Marijuana Today is sponsored by our friends over at Dip Devices, home of the fantastic Little Dipper, a mega useful handheld device that lets you enjoy your cannabis concentrates on the go, just like you're sipping from a straw. The Little Dipper is a beautifully designed piece of hugely functional hardware that is a must-have device for both cannabis aficionados as well as those who are just curious about concentrates. And the best part about the Little Dipper is that it costs just $29.99, which is one of the reasons why the Little Dipper is just flying off the shelves of dispensaries and other shops selling it. If you have a retail establishment and you're not yet selling the Little Dipper there, then do your bottom line a favor and open up dipdevices.com/MJ today right now and learn more about this fabulous sales driver, including how you can become a retailer of the Little Dipper yourself. Or if you're just in the market for a Little Dipper, then pop over to the very same website for a special offer open exclusively to listeners of Marijuana Today. That's dipdevices.com/MJ today. Big thanks to everyone over at Dip Devices for the support that helps us keep the podcast train chugging along.
Hello, and welcome to episode 370 of Marijuana Today. 370, just 50 episodes. That's less than 1 year until the coveted episode 420. Shay, I'm going to do it. I'm calling dibs. Or I'll even settle for shotgun in this case, but I'm a terrible negotiator. Anywho, today I'm your host, Ben Larson, and we're recording Friday, August 6th, 2021. How you doing, Marijuana Nation? Now that we've spent the past 3 weeks breaking down the Schumer bill, I think we'll set that aside a bit, unless one of our guests has something new to add to the conversation, and we'll focus on the other happenings in the market. After peeking its head up back in Q4 of last year, cannabis research is getting another go with the feds. Meanwhile, the East Coast markets continue the slow trend of legalization rollout, while Western states accelerate the normalization and destigmatization of cannabis. That just rolled right off the tongue. We'll be talking about all of this and more when we get serious about marijuana business and politics. But I would never attempt to do it alone, so I'm joined today by two of the smartest and most informed people in the industry and movement. First up, our favorite Politico reporter covering the federal cannabis policy beat, based in Washington, D.C., our literal boots on the ground, Miss Natalie Fertig. Great to be with you again, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And next up, true OG to the show, the Director of Economics and Research at industry-famous law firm Vicente Sederberg in Denver, Colorado, a firm that this here host trusts more than anyone when it comes to regional regulatory guidance. And they're not paying me to say that. Well, actually, quite the contrary. So, yeah, well, how about that? Anyways, Mr. Livingston, how are you doing today?
It's great to be on. It's always good to be on the podcast. Not on as much as I should be, but always a chance to chat cannabis, politics, and business.
Yes, sir. That's what we're here to do. And I'm honored to be here with the two of you. Truly, and I mean this, two of the smartest and most informed people I know. So I'm excited to let you guys carry the load today. There's much to discuss, so we're gonna jump right in. There is much brewing on Capitol Hill these days. We spent a few weeks now touching on Schumer's bill, like I mentioned, and the fallout from that announcement. But there's a lot of other things that are being wagered in those hallowed halls. So as reported this week by our incredible guest, Ms. Fertig, the Democrats are scrambling for cash to cover Biden's $3.5 trillion spending plan. While on Sunday, Senate leaders released the massive and long-anticipated infrastructure bill, which happens to include provisions that aim to allow researchers to study the actual marijuana that consumers are purchasing from state legal dispensaries instead of the old miss, government-grown cannabis, aka ditchweed. Further, and this does actually seem transportation related, some of the funds are allocated to help establish a national standard to prevent marijuana-impaired driving. Hickenlooper's amendment requires the federal government to recommend ways for researchers to access marijuana samples and study how marijuana impairs driving. I'm excited to dig into that one just because it's been kind of an embattled conversation over the last, what feels like a decade, about how to measure impairment in the space. Feels like we can take this a number of different directions today. You'll remember that some level of research was passed late last year by the House, but that unsurprisingly never saw really the light of day on the Senate floor. So this time is different. Right, Natalie?
Passed a research bill. It was just a different research bill.
Oh, it was a different research bill. Okay, well, let's dig into details of that. What is happening with all of these appropriations conversations, budgeting, and all in parallel to this legalization effort that Cory Booker is going to lay down if in front of anything else passing, which I don't think accounts for all this other stuff.
He has sort of walked that back a little bit recently, not to the point where he's yes, I'm on team safe banking, but he has kind of been I'm just saying that I think the priority should be
yes.
CAWA, or however we're saying it. CAWA?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so the research thing, it's actually been kind of funny for me, because I'm so in the weeds on policy on Capitol Hill. It's been funny watching the response to this on Twitter, because everyone's treating it like this is new exciting thing that Congress is doing. And I was we know that both chambers of Congress passed research bills by unanimous vote last December, right? Did we think everyone just that?
That's where I was confused, because there, even in those articles that were coming out, they acknowledged that something was passed.
This is the only popular cannabis thing. Everyone's look, it signifies a massive shift on Capitol Hill. And I was no, it literally just signifies that they're putting the thing that they already passed into an appropriations bill, which is what lawmakers do to try to get the thing that they already passed again. It's
Natalie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think the Senate version of what was passed in last December would have allowed for cannabis from medical and adult use state regulated facilities to go into the research stream. Is that true?
Yeah. Yes. So that is the slight difference with the Senate including the language. And I would say that that's mostly just due to because there were a couple different Senate research bills, and just Feinstein's and Grassley's was the one that kind of got the momentum and got put on the table. It was more of a who do we like, and who what people try to read way too much into this is well, the Senate likes this language better than this language. And it was the end of December. It was the end of a Congress. It was post-election. They literally were just everybody likes cannabis research. We should pick one of them. Pick one of them. Pick one of them and put them on the floor. And because that one had a lot of bipartisan support, because it was Grassley and Feinstein did it together. That's the one that went, if that makes sense.
Got it.
But so
I'm excited to hear that Feinstein is in the mix, kind of evolving, maybe. I don't know.
Will not
exactly. Not evolving.
I will not agree with that. Yeah.
So give us life, because she was quoted as saying, that we need to do the research to understand the safety of cannabis. But is that it?
Literally everybody, even even the most anti-cannabis people are we should do the research. And so then the pro-cannabis people are all right, well, you want to sponsor a bill with me? And then sometimes they're oh man, I walked into that. But that's why Andy Harris co-sponsored, Representative Andy Harris of Maryland, the one who continually introduced the rider to keep DC from having an industry. He co-sponsored Blumenauer's research legislation, because Blumenauer was you keep saying we need research. So, and Andy Harris was I do. Yes, I have to sponsor this. So, I mean, he was one of the major sponsors of it. So that's like why I think that we can't, like, there's definitely momentum or like more movement on research, but it's not surprising that there's more movement on research, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to Andrew's point, I am recalling back in December, right? They were saying that you could, as an institution, apply to become one of these sources of cannabis to be researched. And now we're saying maybe you can just go buy it because it's readily available on the market.
Well, I want to interject for a second. And Natalie, I want your thoughts on this as well. But the amendment that Hickenlooper put forward as part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill is not to enable research institutions to access medical cannabis grown in the state of Colorado or, Missouri or anywhere else. It's to write a report about the feasibility to engage in that activity. And it would, and the report has to be done in the next 2 years. So it's like, by the time this report is written, it's a chance that like we've already passed legislation that allows this.
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing.
So not
to point out. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's not even, it doesn't actually tell anyone that they can research it. It tells the DEA and HHS to like write a report. No, it's to look into ways to make like what people can buy at a dispensary or on the street available for researchers. So like, how would we do this if we did this? Please write a report. Due Thursday.
And
2 years from Thursday.
And we wonder why the federal government continues to fall further and further behind.
I mean, this is the way the federal government works, though. And I think that's the thing that a lot of people in the cannabis space that have like really their main knowledge of politics, whether it be state or federal politics, is like just cannabis legalization, is that nothing works fast. Nothing has ever worked fast, especially not the creation of something from scratch. Like we're over here talking about like incremental increases to like minimum wage. We're talking about incremental changes to Medicare and Medicaid. And like the infrastructure is like, let's add a couple million more dollars to like building trains. Like that's what the federal government does. And so totally legalizing something that has been illegal is like literally like the federal government, like everyone is always talking about it as like the Titanic. And pretty much everything that the federal government does is like tiny tweaks to things that are already in motion. And this is literally asking the Titanic to turn a 180 immediately. And so everyone's like, how are they not doing this quickly? And it's like, honestly, compared to a lot of other things that they do, they're moving at warp speed, which isn't going to make anybody happy, but it's the truth.
Yeah. I mean, on the question of research, right? Like we've been dealing with now since the end of the Obama administration, the changes in the rulings associated with the expansion of the single U.S. authorized facility for the production of cannabis. And so some of our listeners may know for the last few decades, the only institution that has been able to grow, cultivate, and process cannabis for federal research has been in Mississippi. It's a single farm there that is controlled both by the FDA and the DEA. And at the end of the Obama administration, finally changed their rulings to allow for more of these to come out. Nothing really happened much during the Trump administration. There was some guidance, some regulatory guidance from the FDA about what would be needed. There was some back and forth at the administrative levels associated with changing those initial provisional regulations for requirements for those new authorized facilities. But Natalie, have any of those facilities even been issued yet? I know there was a handful of people that have applied. I know none of them have opened yet, but we're talking now at a half a decade long process at least.
No, yeah, they approved some of the applications in May.
In May,
there were preliminary approvals, so there's like still a couple more steps that they need to go through before they're like given a final approval. But it's essentially like, okay, we pick you, you're approved unless you like haven't actually done the things that you've said you've done. Like we're going to come check now. Is essentially. what it is. So they put out they did a couple approvals. And most of these facilities already exist. Like I've gone to one. Cool. And they're like just these empty facilities sitting there waiting to be able to grow like research grade marijuana. They're like, I walked through one and they had like this giant locker for the DEA, and you have to like go in with a pair, and somebody has to write down everyone that went into it. And it has like, because they were like, they don't want people to take weed out of the locker and like sell it. They're like very worried about diversion. It's very interesting. But then everything else about it is like very medical. Like a lot of the people have worked in the past in the pharmaceutical industry. So they're all like, have like a very medical background, medical research background. And so that's like what their focus is. So it feels very different from going to like a normal grow facility, because they're like, we're here for medicine. We're not like we're like doctors and scientists, not like, so they're all like in their lab coats and like I was like, oh, this is a totally different experience. But they kind of had a laugh about the like DEA vault.
So it's very possible that some of this research grade cannabis grown outside of that facility that will be able to be utilized in all sorts of different research will be available starting sometime in 2022.
I think that's like, I mean, I know for these people, that's the hope. I mean, the hope is that they might be able to have some out in the fall even. But I think they have not, last I heard, they have not received the formal like final license yet. But they're already doing like that same facility. There's a lot of overlap between a lot of the different licenses that people have for Schedule I stuff. So I know that facility that I went to also has a Schedule I import license. And so they were the first people to import medical cannabis. I believe they imported it from Colombia. And so they're analyzing it. Like they can't do any human research with it, but they're DNA sequencing it. But yeah, just weird. So there's like, there are minor steps being taken in research. Like that was kind of a big deal that the DEA approved like imports of medical cannabis last year for analysis. But the thing is a lot of this stuff is more on the federal agency level than it is in Congress. Like a lot of the things that we're talking about that were in these appropriations bills were not in the appropriations bill text. It was in the report language. And the report language is more suggestions than it is like law. So if it's in the bill text, it has to happen. If it's in the report, it should happen. But there's a lot more discretion from the agencies for the report text. And so I'd say that at least half of this research stuff that's come out, especially from the House in the last couple of weeks, was all in report text. So that's kind of something important to keep. Like everyone that covered it said that, right? Like they're like, this was report text versus bill text, but I don't think everybody understands kind of the difference that makes.
So
also,
this is interesting. So there's a lot of noise going on. Yeah. So it seems like there's a lot of noise going on. What can we like filter out from this? Like, is there actionable things that are occurring right now that are impactful, like that are different than, didn't occur maybe 7 months ago?
Well, there's a report coming.
A report, not a bill, a report.
I mean,
no, sorry. The report that the bill requires.
There you go.
Potentially.
I've officially gone cross-eyed.
Yeah, I mean, I would say from a market perspective, right? Like if cannabis companies are looking to the federal government enabling them to sell cannabis to authorized researchers for trials as a way of either one, making additional money by expanding the market, or two, getting their specific products through a pipeline that can then, provide medical claims. That to me seems one, a long-term play that may not happen for a while because that authorization has to go through Congress. And two, even more so, if you think about it from the research university perspective, they're simultaneously having more cannabis, as Natalie was just saying, that's going to be grown through FDA-approved facilities, not just that University of Mississippi one. And so are they going to say, I'm going to source my cannabis from this FDA approved new facility that's growing, GMP cannabis in a specific way with specific documentation? Am I going to take that for my research, or am I going to take this newfangled approach in which I can buy it from a adult use or medical store down the street? And it seems to me that a research university is just going to be more inclined to get that cannabis from what will essentially be a competing, we're talking about a potential future, right? A competing source, which is the FDA approved source versus if Congress were to ever allow some sort of clearinghouse in which this cannabis can be taken from state regulated, but currently federally illegal enterprises. So most of this, I look at what is the interesting thing as far as the expansion of research. And to me, the interesting thing about the expansion of research is just what Natalie was saying, which is they finally has given preliminary licenses to a handful of these people that applied, 5+ years ago to actually start and open facilities. And we may be able to get research grade cannabis far earlier than this 2-year perspective that even this report would give. For human trials and studies.
Yeah. So I rounding out, segment 1 here, I want to bubble up something I mentioned earlier that has to do with research, and that's about creating a national standard to prevent marijuana impaired driving. And this was presented by John Hickenlooper. This is just kind of it's an opinion topic. This is something that has been on my radar since, I don't know, I think 2014. I know Hound Labs was working on a breathalyzer, and anyone in the industry is that is not a fair way to determine impairment, for a litany of reasons, or maybe that opinion's misguided. I don't know. I'm curious as to what you guys think, where this leads. What is... Are there any indicators that we have a path forward to really, truly determine impairment? Because it is something that we as an industry want to do. We want to make sure that people are consuming safely and not driving impaired. But we don't want to fall into the old, frameworks of, oh, this is how we treat alcohol, so this is how we have to measure cannabis. Yeah. Either of you have an initial response to the topic of impaired driving?
I think there's so many people researching it right now. UC San Diego is researching it. One of the Colorado universities is researching it. I'm pretty sure one of the Washington State universities is researching it. I think it was Arizona, New Mexico, and or Montana had it in their legalization. That's every new state is this is a problem. Let's research it. I'm why don't you go help the university that's 4 years ahead of you? I don't know, then things will happen faster. Anyway, but research takes a while, right? And it takes a while to what I know UC San Diego is doing is physical impairment tests, pre-alcohol breathalyzer. People had to walk in a straight line and touch their fingers to their nose and do all these things to determine impairment. And so they're trying to create the same types of physical things to do for to determine cannabis impairment. Which in a way, and if you think about it, there's some pros to that because we all know that alcohol impairment affects people's motor skills differently. It's someone who is 0.8% might be able to drive fine, and someone who's 0.8% or 0.4% might be absolutely wild on the road. And so even alcohol impairment tests are imperfect. Breathalyzer tests. And it's interesting because this has been bringing up a lot more discussion about that as well, of how we test for alcohol impairment. But I just don't think there's going to be a quick fix. I feel the physical impairment tests are going to come first, and they're going to have to train police in them. And there's going to need to be funding to retrain all police officers to do these tests. Because right now it's a specialty licensing that you go through after the police academy, whereas they all have to go through the alcohol impairment testing in the police academy. So it's extra money that states have to put aside to train police officers. I've talked to a lot of police units who are like with one officer. And so when we think someone's high, we have to be like, hi, where are you? Can you get over here? You know, and sometimes by the time we get there, it's like the person's like, it's worn off, you know? So it's just like, it's a lot of officers just like don't even really deal with it because it's like too much work. So yeah, I feel like the physical tests are going to come before we actually figure out the science behind what is it that you test to know if someone's currently intoxicated. Like, yeah. On the street. And you can do it a little bit better in a doctor's office with like plasma tests and things like that, but that's not, you just can't.
And the issue, the issue with that we were dealing with in Colorado, and this is also the case across the country, when you're doing, 5 nanograms per milliliter test in blood serum, you have to bring the person to a hospital or to the police station where they have a licensed phlebotomist to be able to take the blood. Mm-hmm. And if you're in a rural area of the state, their blood may not test active THC by the time they get there and you get the person, right? In some states, the blood has to be taken within 2 hours. And it's just like, so you're allowed to drive, it's like, there's just some logistical hurdles there. Plus, does the police officer really want to take what could be 3 hours out of their day to test whether or not someone was high on cannabis while driving? And so this does reduce to a certain extent the amount of enforcement on this, which isn't necessarily what we want, given the fact that we do want our road safes. I will also say that, from a timing perspective, if cannabis was legalized, a decade from now, or we were dealing with this issue a decade from now, it might not be an issue, given that, like, by the time we have a test for cannabis impairment, we could have, 10, 20% of the cars on the road driverless. Mm-hmm. And so,
interesting.
The problem with drinking and driving or smoking and driving is not the smoking or drinking part. It's the driving part. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Driving is just dangerous. It's more dangerous when you're high. We should just have cars that drive themselves and you can hit bong rips on the highway.
Well, and I think also it's not research specific, but another part of this is like, it was the pendulum swing, right? So in a very like well-meaning intentional effort to destigmatize cannabis, I've talked to a lot of advocates that just like even shy away from saying it's bad to like smoke and drive. And this like, no, but cannabis, there's no downsides at all to cannabis. So then I meet people, I've been out here in like the Portland area, like Southwest Washington near Portland, for the last 8 months. And people are always like, no, getting high makes me a better driver. And I'm like, oh no, and but it's that like, it's a pendulum swing, right? It's like, because we've told everyone it's okay and it's so okay that they're like, but then why would I not be able to drive? So it's like now some states are starting to put money into like, and that was actually part of one of the bill languages is into education around drugged driving. And so like Colorado has had a pretty vibrant, like don't smoke and drive campaign. But I haven't seen that to the same extent in a lot of the other legal states. And I think that that's going to become like more popular policy in the coming years.
Yeah. I'm kind of surprised that we haven't shifted to a completely different paradigm already, right? Because I don't know, some of us enjoy a good crossfade and we acknowledge that maybe cannabis plus alcohol creates a whole new experience where you definitely shouldn't be driving. To that extent, like we have so much technology at our fingertips. I'm, hop, skip, and a jump away from Silicon Valley here. How have we not just created a general like cognitive, capacity test where it's like you put this brain scanner on and like it tests like how quickly you respond to things?
Well,
I don't know.
They do have some of those. The issue is that they have to be court certified as we have a lot of this technology. I've seen before, even back in like 2014, applications for like, how fast can you touch the numbers? And just essentially like a battery of tests on an application. Mm-hmm. But what they have to do is be able to be court certified as showing impairment. And that's what Natalie was talking about, all the studies that need to occur to show like, does this device actually, can be used in a court of law about whether or not someone would go to jail. And like, that's where the deal becomes real big.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm always a skeptic, so that's just my position. But I'm like, you get 100 people, get them all drunk, do some like, machine learning, some AI, just throw the whole book at it, and all of a sudden you have like all the information you need. I don't know. It's not that simple.
It's literally like what UCSD is doing.
Great.
Like getting people high and then doing all of these physical.
Yes. Sign me up. That's great.
Yeah. But back to our first segment, or the first part, you probably have to smoke University of Mississippi weed.
Yeah, or some of them, I don't remember what UCSD was doing because I went there like 2 years ago, like pre-pandemic, and like I don't remember anything from before the pandemic anymore. But I don't remember if they were giving them University of Mississippi weed or if people were bringing their own and like using it under supervision. I don't remember which one that was, but I've heard both things being done in different studies. So also, if you take the UCSD or not the UCSD, the Ole Miss weed, and you can always like, make your own tincture out of it if you've got that kind of equipment, and then you can be giving people like higher doses. Anyway. But yeah, I remember that they were giving one thing that they did say that was interesting, and it's like unrelated, but fun fact. They said that they gave people 2 different THC limits. Like there was like a low and then there was a high THC strain that they were having people use. And I'm pretty sure people were vaping, not smoking. I'm pretty sure people were vaping it. And they said that like every single person self-titrated. Like even if they were not a super regular cannabis smoker, like everyone kind of ended up about the same amount of high. And I just thought that was interesting, since there's so much talk about like, if you smoke higher THC, are you going to just get way higher all the time? And they were saying that like people kind of tend to know their limit. Totally random fun fact.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, anecdotally, consuming over the last, call it 6 years, it's like, if you're going up to a dab rig, it's like, oh, maybe just a little tip of just a little oil. Don't put a whole thing of it in, please, because you're just gonna like wreck yourself, and no one likes that feeling. Well, not no one, but I personally don't. So, all right, well, we're going a little off the rails. So let's stick a pin in segment 1. Great start. This is great. I love you guys. This is awesome. We're just getting warmed up. We're gonna kick it over to producer Shay. Hear a word from one of our sponsors that makes all of this possible.
We're happy to have the support of our friends over at Gallardo Labs, a design-first digital experience agency with a deep background in building world-class websites, apps, and products that drive sales and brand awareness. If you have a legal marijuana business, brand, or product and need top-quality design services, then you are going to be happy you heard about Gallardo Labs. And I can say that as a very happy customer of Gallardo Labs myself, as they worked with me over the spring to relaunch our very old and out-of-date MJ Today Media website into the beautiful piece of exquisite functionality that is our new site, which you can check out yourself over at mjtodaymediacomp6936. The folks over at Gallardo Labs asked me all the right questions and quickly got a handle around what we needed for a new website going forward, and were quick and able in turning that into reality. They're expert creative problem solvers focused on creating trailblazing digital experiences that can help your cannabis brand get ahead. If you or your company need help with UX design, strategy, branding, or social media, then you need to open up GallardoLabs.com, with Gallardo spelled Gallardo. That's GallardoLabs.com.
Welcome back, everyone. As you may recall, last week, episode 369, Kieran and I daylighted the frozen state of New York. A little bit kind of continues to roll out there. Yeah, New York's a mess, and Cuomo's a mess, and maybe we'll talk about that. But right next door, New Jersey is taking the stick in the mud torch, it seems like. Regulators, or more specifically, the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission tweeted, because Twitter is where America goes to get their news, that they don't have the power to legalize marijuana home cultivation, override local bans on cannabis businesses, or expunge criminal records. Unfortunately, they can only create, enforce, and implement rules for personal and medical use. I don't know if that's clear to anyone. So let's start there. What's happening with New Jersey and New York? Is the Mid-Atlantic going to get their weed eventually? I don't feel like I'm close enough to it to really be able to sort through all the noise. Who wants first dibs on this one?
I mean, I'm happy to talk about New Jersey, my home state. So New Jersey definitely has a head start over New York, as at least they have a commission, and there are people to talk about determining what needs to happen. Versus New York and Connecticut, where that hasn't really happened yet. I think the big question is, one, are some of these other licenses, medical licenses that have been in litigation for the last few years, are they going to eventually be issued? Because the real question is when are the first stores open? But that's only some of the existing operators very well could open sometime in the fall, potentially. In my mind, is more likely to be the beginning of next year. But there's only about a dozen or so current operators, or current storefronts. I think last time I checked, it was 9 different businesses with 13 different storefronts in New Jersey. And that's just not nearly enough built infrastructure to support consumers, even the rush of initial consumers. They're just going to check things out, and let alone, feeding cannabis to the New York metropolitan area, which will, be a lot more. So we're going to deal with some significant supply shortages in the short run. Now, how that interacts with their existing medical supply and the rules about maintaining medical supply, it's going to be a big question. As if I remember correctly, in New Jersey, the main thing that they need to show to be able to open up to adult use once the regulations eventually get promulgated and finalized in the fall, is that they can both supply the current medical patients as well as the adult use industry. And unless there are people out there building, 500,000 square foot grow facilities in New Jersey, that's going to be hard for any of them to do in a real way. And even if they were to do that in the way that occurred in Illinois, you can only run so many people through your storefront. And so we're going to be dealing with some major supply issues, really high prices. And until they license more facilities, which is going to take a while, and those facilities are built out, the New Jersey market is going to crawl. But what's interesting is that there's no reason to think that it will crawl any slower than New York or Connecticut, given that both of those states also have relatively small markets of existing licensing. I'm not talking about small markets as far as demand. I'm talking about built infrastructure of cultivation, manufacturing, and dispensing. Both New York and Connecticut also have that same issue, small, restricted, limited license medical states transferring to adult use. And I don't see any cultural reason why those states are going to crawl any faster. Some of this could depend on the degree of local licensing and local power that's given. It might be that New York does some more things at the state level, has a little bit less power at the local level when it comes to opt-in, opt-out, which could mean it could move faster, as that's one of the major things we've seen slow things down in a state like Massachusetts. And New Jersey, having just way too many municipalities for the size of the state, could result in some slowdowns at the municipal level. But my guess is Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, they're all going to crawl slowly, but New Jersey is going to be probably 6 to 8 months ahead.
Gotcha. And last show, we did talk about one of the drivers for New York being the fact that we're out of session until, I don't know, January. I don't even know when the session starts back up, but the most recent session was January to June. But for Cuomo, things have seemingly gone from bad to worse, even in the last week. Natalie, what's happening with Cuomo? Like, where do we think this goes for the cannabis industry?
Yeah.
In that state?
I think if if you're out there and you don't know that Andrew Cuomo, that the Attorney General of New York issued a report stating that Andrew Cuomo sexually harassed 9-10 women, then you've been living under a rock for the last 2 weeks. But New York is now talking about impeaching him. His own party has turned against him in New York. The demise of Andrew Cuomo is happening very quickly, it seems. Andrew Cuomo is a New York politician. Who knows if he'll turn this around, find a way to turn it around. But either way, he's not issuing cannabis regulations while he's sorting this out. Right now the state is waiting on him to submit some regulations to the legislature for approval, and that starts the next phase of the regulatory process that will eventually lead to doors opening on recreational shops. And while everybody's waiting on Cuomo, nothing else can move ahead. And so now Cuomo already blew the deadline on that, and now he's mired in probably the biggest scandal of his political career that could very possibly take him down. So I think most of it is probably actually just how long this will take. Is Cuomo going to be impeached? Is Cuomo not going to be impeached? If Cuomo's impeached, how long is it going to take? If Cuomo's out 3 weeks from now, then I assume that the lieutenant governor becomes governor. I don't know that for a fact. I'm not an expert on that part of New York politics, but but then they would just be the next person to do that. I assume they would also have some more pressing matters if they suddenly become governor that they might need to deal with first. But yeah, I don't think it's not it's going to go back in time, and legalization isn't going to happen in New York, but it's definitely going to take a bit longer. Of course, Arizona got their market up and running incredibly quickly, which was kind of insane. But usually, Washington State opened its doors 2 years after it legalized weed. So It's not actually that wild of a timeline for New York and New Jersey were being pretty aggressive with their timelines. Not as aggressive as Arizona was, but they were trying to do it faster than Washington did, or a lot of other states that have legalized, California did. So,
or as Heather and Shay would remind us, Maine's 4 years that it took them.
And Virginia has legislated 4 years. So
true. Well, things per the usual are a bit speedier here on the west side, even in Texas, maybe. So according to the Caller Times, Texas Democratic Attorney General candidate Joe Jaworski said legalizing marijuana is one of his priorities. Number 3, I think, if in his speech. So this is a far cry from their air quotes loosening of the medical restrictions this past quarter, which was a huge disappointment. So Texas has been described on the show in the past as being Charlie Brown, Lucy in the football, always getting your hopes up and pulling it away at the last minute. Is this another case of that? Are they gaining any sort of momentum? Does the Democrat have any chance of winning AG in Texas? And what power does the AG have? I don't know. That's a lot of questions, but kind of open format. Do we get our hopes up for Texas once again, or is this just going to be kind of more of the same? Andrew, what are your thoughts here?
As much as I would love for Texas to get a Democratic attorney general, even if he was attorney general, he's not going to be able to make cannabis legal in Texas. What we really need to see in Texas in order for, let alone adult use cannabis to happen, but for the medical program to happen, is we need to change in the state legislature, particularly the state Senate. Lieutenant Governor Patrick has been a significant roadblock in advancing the medical program in any really significant way. We've worked really hard and we have gotten incremental wins. But the other thing to remember about Texas is that they don't meet every year. Texas legislature meets for a short period of time. I think it's about 45 days or so every other year. And so we're not going to be able to do anything in 2022 because there's not a legislative session until 2023. So the incremental progress that occurs in Texas is even slower than that incrementalism would be in another state where we're able to get another chip on the block for this next year. And so what's going to happen with the existing licensees? They're going to keep trying to keep their doors open, and limit the amount of money that they are essentially losing every year as the program doesn't really have the sort of product types, patient allowances, and things like that to support a functional marketplace. It could be the Department of that regulates these establishments. I'm pretty sure it's the Department of Public Safety could issue some more licenses. There was a period of time we thought they were going to potentially do that about a year or two ago. It must have been 2 years ago because it was before the pandemic. That actually, they put out an application, then nothing happened. It got rescinded. So yeah, Texas is going to be slow. When it's going to happen, I think, is a large degree determined by, does Texas ever, quote unquote, turn blue? And I think that's something that Democrats have been looking at for a long time. But as we've seen, it's difficult to do that, particularly as, you can't just bank on Latino voters, assuming that all of them are Democrats, because they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I believe what had happened was the 3 license holders in Texas. I think they were all serving like 4,000 patients at the time when they were trying to open up these other licenses. And I'm sure they had some conversations like, we don't have a business currently. How are you going to introduce more retailers to serve like such a small market? I actually don't have any visibility into what the new regulations, how that's opened up, if at all, more patients, at least to date.
So it's a little bit of an increase in the allotment of THC, if I remember correctly. But the fascinating thing about Texas, and this is something that, Natalie, I'm not sure if you've ever looked at, is that even in the most restrictive low THC programs, the products that they can sell, because the way that orally active THC works in your body, is actually stronger than what is allowed in most adult use marketplaces, right? So it comes down to the math of it, which is kind of complicated. But if you were to look at some of these businesses in Texas that are selling, low THC products, you can still have 5 milligrams of THC per gummy. Yeah. Because from a percentage weight basis, that's still lower in the oil that goes into those products than the threshold for what is a high concentration product.
Yeah. And I don't know exactly. Oh, sorry.
No. And I was just going to say, you could look at these menus and you can see a bottle of tincture in some of these that has, it's like 5 milligrams of THC per dose. And there's 30 doses in the tincture bottle. That's 150 milligrams, which is more than what is allowed in any adult use marketplace.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the math of hemp, right? Is that if it's 0.3% THC and you have 10 milligrams of THC, then you're going to have math. what is it like? Okay.
Yeah, you could have essentially three.
3 milligrams
you could have
of THC, and then if you have like 100 milligrams of CBD, then you've got 30 milligrams of THC. And so it's like, if you take enough CBD that has 0.3% THC in it, like eventually you get high.
Well, and in Texas, I think they do it as a dry weight of the final product, right? And so I don't know, you drop a bunch of lead into a product and then you could put a bunch of THC in it.
Yeah, well, if I remember correctly, it is the oil that goes into it. So, but with all of these sorts of things, it's like, a milliliter, like with water, a milliliter is about a gram when you convert weight to volume. So obviously the oils are a little different as far as their densities and things like that. But you can put a lot of milligrams of THC in 1 milliliter of oil, and 1 milliliter of oil is not that much. And so to a certain extent, the question is with most of these low THC programs is not necessarily about what is their threshold. It's about what sort of products become feasible. And, if you're in a state like Texas, the only products that are feasible are gummies, tinctures, and some other things like that. When you're dealing with these programs, vape pens wouldn't be feasible based upon those THC thresholds, because you're not going to be vaping something that's like less than 5% THC. Even if they didn't, explicitly ban vape products, which most of them do. And so the real question comes down to what sort of products are available to consumers. And if you're only allowing orally active cannabis products or gummies and things like that, for the most part, it's like none of those products are going to be more than 5 or 10% THC and a dry, and an oil basis anyway, as far as what they need to be for the way that these things get calculated. If you want to have vape pens, that's obviously where these THC restrictions become a lot more important. And it's really interesting to look at some states, particularly like Iowa, which transitioned from a THC percentage cap per product to a no more than 4.5 grams of THC in products every 90 days, which then essentially does allow for full strength vape pens and the like. So it's all fascinating as far as what sort of products change and how these markets change. Because, we see a state like Alabama that just recently legalized medical cannabis. They're not allowing vape products. They're not allowing flower products. It's really just going to be kind of what they call, hilariously enough, now I would say, look at it, gelatinous cuboids, because you can't say gummies. And it's just going to be
does not sound appetizing.
And pills. I know, it's great. It's like they actually
gelatinous cuboids tonight. You're not going to pop a gelatinous cuboid.
You cannot have gelatinous spherical products because they must have edges. Is important.
Cuboids.
Yeah. Well, they also allow
Was this legislation by Plus Gummies because they have those little cubes?
Well, they almost all have little squares because that's actually what's easiest to pop out of the molds. You don't have spheres because that'd be really complicated molds. But all right, that's not important. But essentially, what's interesting is that Alabama doesn't have those percentage THC restrictions. But as far as the sort of products that are available, I don't think it's going to be that dissimilar to a state like Texas.
Yeah. I'll tell you what's fascinating is the fact that I feel not fact checked. You guys have done an excellent job at reality checking what is out there in the news in such abundance. Not only in the first 2 segments here, but even in my intro. So I really appreciate that. You guys need to come together and just do one of those news debriefs, but it's putting the reality filter on it all because there's just so much noise these days.
Natalie is the one who really creates the news that I read and I learn from. I'm just the one. I'm just the one who shit talks.
Don't create.
Okay, you're not creating news. You are taking the news and creating what I am reading. Sorry about that. It came out wrong. Man. Yeah, you're the one.
No, it's actually a joke amongst my coworkers because every once in a while, cannabis Twitter turns out to accuse me of ruining cannabis. This just happens every once in a while. Like I stopped the More Act from passing last September. Like if you were wondering what it was,
clearly,
it was not you. Yeah.
For telling the truth.
But that being said,
happened. I hadn't written about the fact that it was happening.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's your work. It's, Marijuana Moment and just many of these, other reporters that are doing the hard work of getting all this news out. That being said, if we want to do a podcast segment of shitting on the news, I'm all here for the color commentary.
That'd be fun. Just like bring up an article and be like thoughts. But we'll save that for another episode.
I mean, honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm always happy to like answer questions about how I reported an article. So, and I try to on Twitter, but then sometimes on Twitter, people just yell more. So, but I would be happy if people were like, Natalie, I think this article sucked. Why do you think it didn't suck? Please explain your work. I'd be like, oh, hey, here's how we reported the article. But yeah, that's
fine. All right. That wraps up segment 2. We're going to take one last quick break to hear from Shay and one of our sponsors to whom we are incredibly grateful. And when we return, finishing moves.
Do you have a legal marijuana business, brand, service, or company that you need to market to the legal cannabis industry? Then look no further than this very podcast, which is produced by MJ Today Media. We've been around the business of legal marijuana pretty much since that's been a thing, having launched our first episode more than 7 years ago now. Our audience is made up of the full spectrum of the legal marijuana industry and is just packed full of people who make decisions, from dispensary owners and managers to investors and entrepreneurs, with plenty of CEOs and CFOs and COOs and marketing managers and bud tenders thrown into the mix. When you sponsor our shows, you get put in front of all the right people who you want to reach, and you do it through a podcast that they listen to and trust, because we're trustworthy people. To learn more about how you can get on our advertising calendar, just send me an email to shay@mjtodaymediacomp with Shay spelled SHEA.
Welcome back, folks. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show, finishing moves.
Finishing moves.
Finishing moves is the part of our show where our impeccable guests can talk about anything they wish. So, Natalie, let's start with you. What's on your mind?
It's completely not cannabis related at all. But I cannot stop watching and thinking about Olympic sport climbing. And I just need to take an opportunity to talk about how incredible and amazing Olympic sport climbing is. And that
are you a climber yourself? Just to set the framing?
I've done a little bit. Okay. I am like very not good climber, but I own climbing shoes. I go climbing. I started in the last couple months. So in a way that makes it like even more, I'm just watching these people and I'm like, how do they do that thing that they just did? They'll like stick 2 fingers on a tiny little ledge and pull their entire body up by those 2 fingers. It's insane.
Wow.
They're like these 4 or 5 hour competitions that you can watch on the NBC Olympics app. And like, that's what I'm going to go do when we're done. Like that's my plan is to like grab a drink and watch Olympic sport climbing. Like I cannot, like I have to pause it to go to the kitchen or to go to the bathroom because I cannot stop watching because it is so incredible. So I think everyone should watch Olympic sport climbing. That is hopefully, it's not cannabis related, but hopefully everyone can benefit from that recommendation.
Amazing. All right. Your new binge watching opportunity, folks. There it is.
Off your gelatinous cuboid and then some sport climbing.
I'm going to do a quick shout out for this brand that I found up when I was in Portland called Grown. And they have the spheroids, gelatinous spheroids. So if you're in the market for a gelatinous spheroid, go look up Grown, GRO with the, what is that, an umlaut on top and then N. So yeah, free shout out. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Make it cannabis related.
Yeah. Mr. Livingston, any Olympic sports for you, or what's on your mind?
Well, I mean, I will say that for all those who want to know just the really cool, crazy things that occur in the Olympics, there's a lot of fun things. The sport climbing is really interesting. But like, there's also modern pentathlon, which is a combination of fencing, freestyle swimming, equestrian show jumping, pistol shooting, and cross-country running, which to me is all like the skills you need from like running from the law in the 1200s, right?
Yes.
Like,
just give them a backpack full of weed and we'll be good.
You're in like a sword battle.
Yeah. No, like the modern pentathlon, I was literally thinking about this morning while I was trying to find sport climbing. The modern pentathlon, it's like essentially like how good are you at being a young British lord? Like, can you ride a horse, like fence, and then shoot a pistol, like just at like a target, like, and then run away really fast or something? It's the weirdest combination of sports.
Yeah, it's like, the skills you need as the Dread Pirate Roberts,
So good.
But beyond that, what I've been thinking about is the things that I have to think about all the time, which is like, for instance, these lotteries that are coming out in Illinois as far as dispensary licensing, right? They did the first one last week. They announced 60 or so different licensees. I think they just announced another 55 in the quote unquote social equity lottery. And of course, the first news article that comes out at Gronin, which, I think has done a pretty good job analyzing some of this stuff, is that like all these social equity licensees are all tied to wealthy people or well-connected individuals or families or existing cultivators or multi-state operators. Are they truly like, your social equity applicant who has been harmed by the war on drugs, or do they just have a few people that are on the team but aren't really the people that are in charge of this? And I would just say that, again, this is, something I say pretty frequently on the podcast, but I'm on less often, so you guys probably hear it less, is that you can't have a limited licensing system where licenses are worth millions and millions of dollars, and for those licenses to truly go to low-income entrepreneurs who control the business and were directly harmed by the war on drugs. It's just not the type of system that you're going to get when winning one of those requires putting together a team and funding an application worth tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So states, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, you're going down this path because it seems as that's just what you've decided to do. But your social equity programs will likely fail, at least in the overarching sense of rectifying the wrongs of the war on drugs by giving individuals who were previous illicit, small-time illicit operators a legal business. And there may be a few that are able to get this, but on the whole, those will fail because the systems that you are creating are not designed to empower small business entrepreneurs. They're designed to empower individuals who are able to build large teams and apply as part of large application processes. And so please stop doing that. Stop doing that. Stop limiting licenses at the state level. Sure, allow local governments to regulate as you please. But if you want to actually have small business entrepreneurs, you need to create a system that doesn't require tens of thousands of dollars to even get past the front door.
And stop making it. Oh, go ahead, Natalie. Go ahead.
I was just thinking while you were saying this, it's kind of disappointing that the states that have not been limited, like have not put limits on licenses, like Oregon, are like some of the whitest states in the country. So we have such a hard time looking and being like, what was the impact of this state model versus like the Illinois state model? It's just like, it's very, and we can kind of look at what happened in California, but I feel like California is like its own animal in every situation because it's California. So I don't know. That was just like as a reporter, I'm like, I can't tell anybody anything about this because I have nothing to compare anything to.
I would be fascinated to know like how many African-American entrepreneurs are there in Oklahoma? Because it may be a case where the most people of, or maybe not like most people of color who are cannabis business owners are possibly in Oklahoma. And it's like, you want to talk about a state that's not seen as, you know, at the forefront of social equity policy. And yet it's the easiest place to start a business.
Yeah.
It is also, it's not as white as Oregon, but it is kind of on the whiter side.
Yeah.
I just looked it up. It's like 70% white people.
Well, the last mile there too is like, don't make it so damn complicated to operate a business in your state. Don't make the tax system so complicated that you require a team of MBAs to do it. Like I talk about that a lot. It's, you know, we have a very sophisticated team and it's still an everyday thing where we have questions about like, are we doing this right? It shouldn't be that difficult. All right.
You know, someone did make an argument to me in Massachusetts. A very smart person made the argument to me that Massachusetts program obviously didn't work very well at the offset, but now because they limited the licenses, the venture capital that might have just gone to like already connected white men had to get funneled into some of the social equity license holders in that state. And I hadn't really thought of it through that lens. And I don't know if it's right or not. And I don't know if we like know yet because Massachusetts equity program has been so slow to get going that I feel like we won't really know if that actually worked out the way that it was hoped for a couple more years now. But I did think that was sort of an interesting, just to play devil's advocate a little bit.
And the interesting thing about Massachusetts, though, is that they didn't actually limit the licenses at the state level. That was all the local level.
Yes, this is very true.
So with that, it's a time thing as well, right? Like if you don't limit at the state level, but you allow locals to limit, local governments can innovate, change things over time, and new entrepreneurs can come in. They can figure out what's right or not. It's just harder to do that when you do it all at the state level. And this is why there's new applications. There's new social equity entrepreneurs in Massachusetts every year because they're applying as part of these new local programs. Whereas in Illinois, it's just going to happen over the course of the state licensing process. And once that's eventually finalized, you're not really going to have anyone.
Yeah. Well, credit to Mr. Livingston for helping create our third segment there. It was a good one. Thank you. I'm going to wrap this up with a quick shout out to my team, my Vertosa family. This past week, we celebrated our third anniversary, which doesn't sound like a huge accomplishment probably to most listening, but that's 21 in cannabis years if you're counting. If you know, you know. Many think of companies simply as, you know, capitalistic vehicles or maybe even just a means to a paycheck. But for me, the anniversary of a company is a representation of an idea someone or a group of people is sharing with the world. And it represents, you know, frankly, the courage in all of us to create and potentially fail and